You can't wrap up a video series on art without a deep dive conversation about robots. So let's do that. You may be saying to yourself, this video series on art feels more Trojan horse than video series on art, and that would be a fair criticism. But nonetheless, I think that there is a very roundabout, circuitous way that we are going to find our way from robots to art in a way that hopefully will make sense by the end of this. When I say robots, what I really mean is automation. And unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably read the headlines and seen politicians talk about the need to retrain the workforce. And what that ultimately means is that over time, there is an expectation that certain jobs are going to be better done by robots or automation than they're done by humans. And so the idea is to move those particular workers into new jobs that are more resilient to automation. And that resilience is kind of the first thing that I wanted to talk about here, because humans are a really interesting generalist. Thanks to the wonders of evolution, we are exceedingly good at a great many things. And that's a pretty stark contrast to robots that are more often than not purpose-built to do exactly one thing. To kind of put a point on this, one example is robots that look like humans. Every major technology conference slash showcase generally has a robot that walks around on two legs. They sometimes fall over or fall off stage or walk in a way that is incredibly creepy because it is really difficult to make robots walk like humans. And what makes this even more interesting is if you wanted a robot that could, let's say, move 60 miles per hour, you likely wouldn't choose to give it legs. Because instead, you could go Johnny Five style and give it tractor treads and make it go 60 miles an hour on the highway instead. So that's what I mean by purpose-built. The second example that I want to talk about actually goes back to a bet that I made with a coworker maybe 4 or 5 years ago that popped up on my calendar because it's coming due soon. And that was a bet about the prevalence of self-driving cars in the world today. Back then, wearing my rose-colored glasses, I was sure that within 5 years, self-driving cars would be a reality and we would all be at least exposed to them, and they would be somewhat commonplace. Now, living in San Francisco, I see a lot of self-driving cars. Most of them are driven by people still. And true autonomy hasn't really reached self-driving cars yet. But the example that I wanted to talk about is much more humans' relationship to cars. The reason that I find this so fascinating is humans are not well built to drive cars, right? We have a cone of vision ahead of us, and if we say want to back up, we have to adjust our mirrors, look in certain mirrors in order to get an incomplete picture and hopefully not run anything over. Then they added backup cameras to make that a little easier. And even today, some really fancy cars have like 360 views that they show you of everything around them. But the point is, we're still a human being who can see and focus on one thing at a time. You compare that to a robot that can see in a perfect 360 degrees around it and pay attention to every angle around it and every distraction within that circle perfectly at all times. And you have something that, when purpose-built to drive a car, should eventually be much better than humans at doing the same task. To put it a different way, a lot of the technology that is built into cars is solving a problem that is created by the nature of the way that human beings are. And if you were to imagine a car that was driven by a machine, the machine would be purpose-built so that none of those problems existed in the first place. You wouldn't need rearview mirrors, as an example. What this gets to for me is that I think the idea of retraining a workforce is a game of whack-a-mole that we will kind of play eternally until we run out of moles. And what I kind of mean by that is there will always be new jobs being automated, even jobs that we think of as incredibly skilled. One that springs to mind for me is radiologists and oncologists. The act of reading those scans is something that historically could only be done by humans and requires a lot of skill. But recent research has proven that computers can be far more accurate in diagnosing certain types of cancer and other ailments. And that trend isn't going to change. Much of the medical profession will likely find itself being heavily augmented by computer vision, computer analysis, and eventually much of medicine will probably be automated. And then the profession that I have always thought of as most resilient to not being automated is the people who create the automation, let's say software engineers. But in a funny way, you can think of them as writing in a programming language. And what is a programming language other than a crutch that is created because humans are bad at talking to machines, right? If to make text appear at the bottom of the screen here, I had to type in a series of zeros and ones.
Solo.
0000001 0000001.
This video would never get created. So in that way, humans are not particularly good at communicating to robots or automations. And at some point in the future, we may find that our systems for creating automation are systems that learn and are intelligent in their own right. The example of this today are neural net intelligences. We train them on a set of data, but the actual contents of the logic that make them work and allow them to make the decisions that they're making or make the identifications that they're making are a bit of a black box to us. We don't understand exactly the information that is being encoded by the machine in order to teach another machine intelligence, essentially, how to tell the difference between a chihuahua and a blueberry muffin. And so the conclusion that I've come to is maybe no job is safe at all. Maybe all jobs will ultimately be automated, and the idea of work and our relationship to work will need to change. The place where this gets messy is that today the idea of working is heavily coupled with the idea of surviving. If you want to have health insurance, a roof over your head, food on your table, you need to work to make money. And it's possible in the future that that paradigm will be turned on its head because there will be a scarcity of work. Machines and computers will just be better at whatever task it is we happen to identify as work. And in that world, there are two potential diverging realities.
Just so you know, Jeff, you were not creating 6 different timelines.
One we'll just call the darkest timeline, and that's a continuation of our current timeline, perhaps unsurprisingly, where the bounty of automation is asymmetrically given to the richest N% of people in our world, and the majority of people don't really see the benefits. An example of this would be automating a grocery store. Amazon has a chain of totally automated grocery stores. And the reality is that they sell those products at the same price that a human-manned grocery store sells them for, right? The efficiency that is gained by not having to pay a bunch of employees' salaries is not passed off to the consumer, but instead is encoded into Amazon's bottom line in the form of them making more money and lining the pockets of the Amazon stockholders and all of the other people who benefit from Amazon's success. Needless to say, if automation continues to take away or automate jobs or remove the necessity for humans to do certain jobs, over time, the absence of sufficient jobs to keep everyone busy would lead to a massive wealth gap, far larger than the wealth gaps that we're already seeing today. And it would lead to a great many people living in extraordinary poverty because they are not benefiting from the result of this incredible human ingenuity. But we're going to take that dark timeline and we're going to kind of put it on a shelf, and we're going to assume that instead, as a society, we figure out what we're doing and make the changes that we need to take care of everyone. And so that's timeline number 2, the happy timeline. It's a timeline where the bountifulness of resources and the bounty that is brought through automation is shared across the entire population, and the lack of work for everyone to do does not mean that people are living in poverty or unable to afford rent or pay for necessities of life. It's a world in which there is universal health care. There is maybe a universal income if we're still a capitalist society. There are social safety nets that protect people if they find themselves running on hard times. And actually, speaking of universal basic income, one of the interesting criticisms of universal basic income is the idea that if you gave people enough money to survive, they'd be lazy and not work. I'll ignore the kind of jaded perspective that we need to have people's survival in jeopardy to force them to work thing, which is dark in and of its own right, and focus on the fact that empirically it's been proven not true. When people have been provided universal basic income, they have not immediately quit their jobs, become lazy and destitute. Many of them, though, have become part-time workers. And that makes sense because the amount of time that we spend working day to day is an incredible portion of our lives. And maybe with less pressure to work because you weren't worried about your survival, people would work a little less. And that could be a real societal benefit. But regardless, I think what is interesting, and my explanation for why people keep working, is that the absence of the need to work does not translate into people no longer having a need for purpose. And I think that's where we return to art. Because I think that I have certainly found in my experiences, and it certainly seems clear to me, that in a world where people still want purpose and the necessity for work has evaporated, art is a beautiful thing to fill that gap with. And it's tailor-made for us because if you go all the way back to the first video that I did in this series, if we look at the definition of art, right there in the definition is human creativity and imagination. We have essentially hung a no robots allowed sign on art and said that it can only be created through the imagination and creativity of humans. And as a result, it can never be automated. And yet it provides an incredible opportunity for a sense of purpose, accomplishment, success, and challenge that I believe is very core to what humanity and what individuals need to lead a fulfilled life. And so that leads us back to the question that we began this whole series with, which is, what is the value of art? We spent last video kind of taking a marketplace approach, and it felt wholly unsatisfactory to me. I don't like the idea of my videos being worth 4 cents. And in thinking about this problem, the problem of if work were to evaporate and what the uniqueness of art to humans is, I've come to the conclusion that there's a bit of a symbiotic relationship between humanity and humankind and art. In one direction, you have what art gives to those who practice art. And I think that that is, as I said before, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of purpose, something to challenge yourself with, something to strive towards, something to see yourself learn through, get better at, do better at. And that is a very fulfilling act in and of itself. But second, I think that the act of making art is an act of struggling. That was one of the early videos that I did titled The Struggle of Struggling, I think. And I realized my own personal allergy to struggling, but also my desire to struggle, to do something that is hard, that I am not good at, and do it in a way where others are able to see me wrestle through challenges, make mistakes, and get better over time. And in that video, my contention was that we don't hold other people's struggles against them. But what I think I've come to realize through this journey and through talking about art is that it's something more than that. It is that the act of struggling to create something is what imparts value in it. Essentially, the greater the struggle, the greater the value. And we as humans are, I think, innately capable and innately attuned to the idea of recognizing others' struggle and appreciating it and recognizing the difficulty of the accomplishments of others. And so, in a way, I think that that is the other side of it. We impart on art our struggle, and in a way, art is struggle. And struggle is something that we, I think, all need in order to lead fulfilled, purposeful lives. So, I don't know if that was too neat a bow to put on it, but I think that's the end. I think that's the conclusion that I have come to. And so I want to thank you for coming along on this journey. I didn't really know where I was going to end up when I started it, but I felt like it was a place that I wanted to go. So thank you as always for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Not apotamus. Ponderous.